There are moments in life when people gather to witness grace, courage, and perseverance. This is about one of those moments. It was called the Great Winnipesaukee Swim. A lone swimmer attempts to cross the Great Lake Winnipesaukee of New Hampshire. For the average person, a 22-mile swim is a daunting task to consider. With the heart and spirit few can lay claim to, this lone swimmer is far from the average person. George Brunstad has accomplished many things in his life, some quite notable, but this act of sacrifice would test his resolve like no other. George served his country with his 7-year career in the U.S. Air Force, flying B-52s. For 30 years, as a pilot, he served thousands of passengers with American Airlines. A passionate swimmer all his life, George has coached hundreds of children and adults on how to swim. George is the epitome of community service. After retirement, he made international headlines with a simple, quiet effort. On August 28, 2004, George set out to do what no one had done before, and he dedicated his effort to help children in Haiti. At age 70, George became the oldest person ever to swim across the English Channel. His time, 15 hours and 59 minutes. And he raised over $50,000 for the children in the Haitian city of Hampshire. For most endurance athletes who are over the age of 70, that would be a great way to hang up your goggles and call it a life. But not George. The man who dedicated his life to service was not quite done yet. Six years later, on a cold day in late spring of 2010, George pledged his service once again and sealed it with a simple handshake. The Great Winnipesaukee Swim was born. George would dedicate the next few months of his life to prepare to become the oldest person ever to swim Lake Winnipesaukee, all in an effort to raise money for the WLNH Children's Auction, a local Lakes Region charity. On Wednesday, August 25, 2010, at 10 p.m., on George's 76th birthday, after a brief ceremony of song, prayer, and well-wishing, the Great Winnipesaukee Swim began from the sandy beach of Center Harbor. As George entered the dark waters of Winnipesaukee for an epic 22-mile attempt, a kind of collective spiritual voyeurism was felt from the small crowd. George had surrendered to the elements of nature and to a higher power. He began his good work for those in need. He began his call to service once again. Once underway, George will rely solely on the crew of his support boat. Piloted by off-duty members of the City of Laconia Fire Department, the 22-foot rescue boat resembling a floating MASH unit with GPS equipment on board, the crew is responsible for setting the course of the swim and, most importantly, providing George's nutrition. During the swim, a plastic bottle, which is tethered on a rope, is thrown out to him every 30 minutes. The bottle contains a mixture of water and energy powder, which is intended to provide an even level of nutrients necessary for the swim. George needs to consume 8 ounces every 30 minutes. With ease, he passed by Black Cat, 3 Mile, Long, and Bear Islands. Now he was entering the wide-open section of the lake known as the Broads. In spite of the 3-foot-high waves and winds gusting at 40 miles per hour, George seemed to be accepting quite well the birthday gift Mother Nature had sent him. But looks were deceiving. You see, George, who is a stickler on the rules and regulations of long-distance channel swims, is only suited up with a swim cap and swimsuit. Wetsuits are never even considered by the true long-distance swimmers. This adherence to the code is quietly beginning to take its toll on George's body. With only 6 miles to go, as he comes out of the Broads and begins to pass Rattlesnake Island, his pace begins to drop. Now only 1 mile per hour. His crew begins to notice signs of fatigue, and he isn't consuming all of his 8 ounces of fluid, so the feedings are pushed up to every 20 minutes. Up to this point, his strokes per minute were at 57. His strokes are now in the 40s, and it was clear that George was hitting the wall. A well-documented occurrence with endurance athletes when the body begins to shut down. Hypothermia was setting in. Approaching the mouth of Alton Bay with only 3.5 miles to go, George's kidneys and urinary systems were no longer cooperating. The blood flow to his extremities were being diverted to his main organs. His arms and legs were like lead pipes. He was in pain, and his pace had dropped to an imperceptible half mile per hour. His strokes per minute were now in the 30s. Captain Bob Landry of the Laconia Fire Department noticed George's body was completely upright and he was barely moving. The captain had the responsibility of overseeing the well-being of George during the swim. It was determined that George's stepson Doug would jump into the water to break the news to George. The group had decided that it was time to call the swim. Doug approached his stepdad and said, "Do you think we should call it a day?" George's answer was an emphatic "no way." At that point, something kicked in, and George was even more determined. Doug, an exercise physiologist, suggested to George to try different swim strokes, which would utilize a new set of muscles. With only a few miles to go, Doug decided to stay in the water and swim alongside of his stepfather. This simple gesture of kindness and switching to the breaststroke is what seemed to make all the difference. During the final 2 miles, with the help of his stepson and the cheering of hundreds of people who lined the shores of Alton Bay, George had incredibly increased his pace back to over 1 mile per hour. They tried to tell him to quit, that it was too far, that he was simply too old and had run out of gas. He fooled his family and friends. He fooled the firefighters. He fooled the media personnel, all who watched him struggle. George fooled them all. At exactly 7:53 p.m., hours after his initial estimated arrival time, after nearly 22 hours of swimming, George crawled up the sandy beach at Alton Bay. In his first attempt to stand, he stumbled to his knees. Then, using his last ounce of strength left in him, he rose to his feet. With flashbulbs popping, boat horns blowing, and hundreds of people cheering, George had done what he set out to do. He fulfilled his commitment to complete the swim in hope that others would be inspired to make a donation. His call to service was finished. Those who have watched this incredible drama unfold have been forever changed, inspired by this one man's desire to succeed, not for personal glory, but for those in need in his community. What started out as a charity event for those less fortunate ended as a lesson in life for all of us to remember. Please honor George's incredible effort and donate today. Click the donate button to make a secure online donation to the WLNH Children's Auction. Thank you.